will bring us back up to the federal level on what's going on all those other I'm not EPA federal agencies.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. I am going to be talking about all the other actions that federal agencies are taking on PFAS, but I wanted to start out just with a basic background of the history of EPA's regulations, just to give you a framework for viewing what the other agencies are doing and the timing of those. So it was in 1998 that EPA first became aware of issues with PFAS. They received a TSCA submission from 3M that informed EPA of the persistent nature of PFAS for the first time. They began their regulations with 2002 two significant new use rules that required notification before any future manufacturing or importing of 88 different PFAS chemicals. 2006 was the creation of the PFOA Stewardship Program, where 8 companies in the industry were invited to help reduce PFOA. 2009, the provisional health advisory limits for PFOA and PFAS were issued, and then they really started the planning. So there was the 2019 PFAS Action Plan and the 2021 Strategic Roadmap, and Taryn walked you through what happened last year with all the flurry of activity that EPA was working on. So these are some of the things, but certainly not all of them. As Taryn also mentioned, the MCL rule was challenged in the DC Court of Appeals, just as the CERCLA designation was challenged. As a remediation lawyer, the CERCLA designation is particularly of interest to me. So tomorrow is the end of the administration's request for an abeyance on that litigation. So we expect that they'll ask for another 30-day extension, just as they did on the MCL litigation. Their justification for another 30 days on the MCL was that they are waiting to appoint a PFAS expert within EPA, so we'll see who that is. But we expect that to happen tomorrow with the CERCLA designations as well. So the other agencies that are tackling PFAS within the federal government are numerous. They're listed here. And there, you'll see as we go through it, there are really 3 buckets of agencies. There's the agencies that actually used PFAS in their operations, and they're trying to address historic releases or figure out how to dispose of what they have. Then there's a group of agencies that are just working on studying PFAS, and then another category that hands out grants to help people who are trying to address PFAS in their own work. So the Department of Defense, we'll start with them. And most of you, I'm sure, are aware that most of their issues arise from AFFF. AFFF began being used at military sites in the 70s, pursuant to a military specification or mil-spec that required that AFFF be used for firefighting. 722 DoD installations required assessment of PFAS use or potential releases. As of September, DoD had determined that no further action was required at 131 of those, while 518 were proceeding to the next step in the CERCLA process, so investigation and remediation. A lot of DoD's problems arise out of off-site migration, off-base migration of groundwater contaminated with AFFF. There are lawsuits by states, individuals who allege they were exposed to contamination either on base or off base. And most of that litigation has been consolidated in the AFFF multi-district litigation in the federal court in the District of South Carolina. So there are thousands and thousands of cases in that MDL, but the courts just decided it was easier to address all of these discovery issues and all of the other causes of action in one centralized location, so most of these cases are being held there. Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico is the poster child of what can go wrong on DoD bases related to PFAS. Historic releases at Cannon resulted in neighboring dairy farms being contaminated, which resulted in contaminated milk, contaminated meat, and destruction of the herds. So there's a long-going litigation about those dairy farms that neighbored the base. Taryn mentioned the governor of New Mexico initiating the RCRA designations for PFAS. That's also a result of what was happening at Cannon. So they've got lawsuits by the state, they've got lawsuits by dairy farmers, they've got lawsuits by other people who allege they've been exposed, and then because they can't catch a break, in 2024, there was a 7,000 gallon release of water contaminated with PFAS while they were trying to remove PFAS from their emergency vehicles. So that's, they are a perfect example of everything that could go wrong at a DoD installation related to PFAS. As of January, DoD estimated that its further costs to investigate PFAS were $989 million, and the cost to remediate PFAS were $6.1 billion. So it's a huge effort that DoD is going to have to undertake to address the problem. Congress remains very active on DoD PFAS issues. Last month, the House reintroduced the DoD PFAS Discharge Prevention Act, which would require quarterly monitoring of stormwater discharges for PFAS at DoD bases and the use of best management practices to reduce those discharges. So between the states and citizen suits in Congress, we don't expect any slowdown of DoD work related to PFAS and AFFF under the new administration. The Department of Agriculture, their role has largely been to provide support to farmers in rural communities dealing with PFAS. They've got a number of grants that they historically have given out. The Emergency Community Water Assistance Grants provide funding to rural communities to address PFAS in water production wells. The Dairy Indemnity Payment Program compensates farmers for loss of dairy cows because of PFAS. Back to Cannon Air Force Base. Natural Resources Conservation Services offers financial assistance for PFAS soil and groundwater sampling for farming operations. And then I know you talked about biosolids yesterday. In 2024, USDA's Agricultural Research Service with the University of Maine began working on a research roadmap for PFAS in agriculture, which includes biosolids issues and removing PFAS from the production environment. So it's not clear whether the current administration has the appetite to continue with this level of grant giving that has historically been given out. So we will see what happens with the USDA's grant programs in the future. The Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, they also are one of those agencies that actually has used AFFF and has PFAS issues related to their usage. So they've been fairly active. They've inventoried their PFAS use and releases. They have initiated a process for investigating and starting response actions for those releases. And they're not the only one who has issues with personal protective equipment for firefighters and other emergency response personnel, but PFAS and turnout gear, the firefighters' equipment, is an issue for a number of these agencies. PFAS are great for turnout gear because they're a water repellent and serve as a moisture barrier, but obviously there are issues with exposure, so it's being phased out in that type of equipment for firefighters. HHS, this is an agency that's doing, or has been historically doing a lot of studying. You can see all the different acronyms for all the different component agencies that make up HHS. The NIH, the National Toxicology Program, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences have all been conducting studies into various PFAS effects. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry has created resources for healthcare providers related to PFAS. And I've tried this myself. It's a little bit alarming when you input these numbers, but they have a PFAS blood level estimation tool, which lets you input PFAS concentrations in your tap water and then various other inputs, and will estimate the level of PFAS in your blood. They also conduct exposure assessments to investigate whether people in specific communities have been exposed to PFAS. The CDC participates in those exposure assessments. And the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health is also working on assessments of turnout gear for firemen. On April 1st, the administration announced that HHS's component agencies would be reduced from 28 to 15. 10,000 more jobs would be cut on top of the 10,000 that had already been cut. And there would be a shift in the focus of the CDC. So it's not clear what that means for all these agencies who have been doing the studying, the PFAS studying, whether they are going to exist in the next couple months. We don't know for sure, but the deadline or the effective date for the reorganization of HHS is May 27th. So we will know after that date more about the status of a lot of these PFAS studies and the work of the agency. Also under HHS is the FDA. In 2019, the FDA began testing foods for PFAS coming from specific regions with known environmental contamination, specifically dairy products from certain farms in New Mexico, back to Cannon Air Force Base, and produce from North Carolina. They've expanded the testing into processed foods, seafood, and beef since 2020, and they're actually working on this now, currently. They've been working on phasing out certain PFAS in grease proofing, in fast food wrappers and pizza boxes. And right now, the FDA has the ability to measure 30 PFAS in food and has extended its sampling methods to include animal feed samples. Jorge mentioned that when the federal government won't act, the states will. So one of the things the states have been active on is product bans. So they've banned, a number of states have banned a number of products. Some of them are effective now, some of them go into effect in 10 years and 15 years. But one of those categories of products that the states have been banning are cookware with PFAS. So that's Teflon. That's difficult for the industry, the cookware industry. So they've been actively engaged with state legislatures to try to work out an exemption for polymer-coated durable items that the FDA authorizes for food contact. So Teflon is a FDA-approved food surface contact material. So it's kind of an interplay between what the states are doing and what the federal government is doing, the fact that the FDA has approved it and now states are banning it. So trying to get some little bit of leeway for the cookware industry. The Department of Transportation and the FAA, again, this goes back to AFFF. The FAA regulates airports, and they issued for a number of years CERT alerts, which was guidance for the airports on requirements for how they needed to operate. And the CERT alerts incorporated the MIL specs, which in turn incorporated AFFF. So that has been something that the FAA has been trying to resolve. In 2022, Congress directed the FAA to prepare a transition plan to fluorine-free foam, F3. The FAA Reauthorization Act included a PFAS replacement program for airports to replace PFAS-containing foams with non-fluorinated options. And they reimbursed costs of equipment replacement incurred after September 12 of 2023. So for emergency equipment that has been dispensing AFFF for years, it's almost impossible to clean that equipment out to get rid of the AFFF. So even if you switch to F3 and run it through the same equipment, you're likely still dispensing AFFF remnants. So the cleanest and best way to make sure you're not doing that is to actually replace the emergency equipment. So this program offered some reimbursement costs for that type of work. And in 2024, the Airport Improvement Program grants provided money for testing of PFAS remediation technologies. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, so again, the federal government, through the commission, has the ability to regulate PFAS in consumer products, and they're just simply not doing it. And because they're not doing it, the states are doing it, which makes it very hard for industry to figure out, to navigate a complex array of different product bans. So, some of the things the commission could regulate, but they're not, and the states are: apparel, furnishing, packaging, children's products, household cleaners, cookware, which we talked about. What the commission has been doing since 2022 is an information gathering effort to try to better understand the potential presence and use of PFAS in consumer products. They've told us that they intend to use the information in ongoing work to understand hazards, exposures, and potential health risks, but they're not actually releasing the information or taking steps to do anything. So they do fund testing efforts on PFAS in products. They're beginning the development of performance standards for PFAS in consumer products, but no mandatory standards. So the states are stepping into that void. OSHA, so OSHA identifies the three occupations that are more likely to be exposed to PFAS than the general population as chemical manufacturing workers, firefighters, and ski wax technicians. Ski wax is another product that the states are regulating because it does contain PFAS. In 2024, OSHA issued a proposed rule updating the emergency response standard for first responders and included a request for information about PFAS and turnout gear. They specifically asked whether the PFAS was causing health issues for team members and responders. Comments were accepted through January of this year, so we'll see how OSHA responds to those comments. Historically, the Executive Office of the President has been active in PFAS. The White House Council on Environmental Quality in 2021 created a cross-government interagency policy committee to share information and collaborate on PFAS. In December of 2021, President Biden signed an executive order which set out to reduce or eliminate PFAS from the federal supply chain. President Trump revoked that executive order in January of this year. The Office of Science and Technology Policy in 2021 developed a PFAS strategy team which reports to Congress on the status of PFAS research. So it remains to be seen what happens with the current administration and whether the Office of the President continues with these PFAS efforts or whether they just kind of put them all on the back burner. But no indication yet. NASA is another agency that actually used PFAS in AFFF. They are currently conducting an agency-wide investigation into areas where releases from past work practices involving materials or products that contain PFAS may have occurred. And they have a policy restricting the use of AFFF to emergencies only and have cleanup procedures in place to collect and dispose of AFFF. The VA is investigating PFAS levels in military firefighters and construction workers. And lastly, the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy issued a PFAS policy in 2021 to assess PFAS presence at DOE sites, which included specifically a review of both classified and unclassified documents. So I'm very curious what classified documents would discuss PFAS, but they're taking a look at both categories. In order to manage risk, advance research, and develop technologies, they specifically put in their policy that they're going to leverage the expertise of the national laboratories to advance knowledge about PFAS fate and transport. In 2022, they issued an action plan, which included all of the items in the 2021 policy, in addition to cleaning up PFAS contamination where needed to protect human health and ecological systems. And they specifically stated they would be engaging with regulators, tribal nations, and local communities. In 2022, they also released an initial assessment on PFAS at DOE sites, summarizing the results of their preliminary evaluation. And in 2022, they updated procurement guidance to reduce the purchase of PFAS-containing products. So that's the status. That's where everyone has been. We don't really know for sure what's next. We think that at the agencies that have used AFFF and other PFAS products in the past and are working on investigating and cleaning up and disposing of that material, all that work is probably going to continue, forced by lawsuits and state action, and Congress is very active in that particular piece of the puzzle. So we think that work is going to continue. For the agencies that are doing research and handing out grants, it's not clear yet what level of interest the current administration has in continuing that scope of work, but we should know more in the next couple months.
Thank you very much. Before we start for questions, just one point. Just want to note that the constituents that make up ski wax are also used in surfboard wax. So the Florida elements of the crowd, just keep that in mind. Any questions?
Hi, Tanya Chandler from BioLargo. I just wanted your quick opinion. I know that at least with the work that's being done in Maine, that the dairy indemnity, it's a dairy indemnity payment fund, it's DIPP, has started to compensate farmers for all of the loss due to PFAS. But there's also a lot of work in Maine where they're trying to go into the USDA conservancy programs, and they're running into a lot of PFAS issues. And I just wanted your opinion on whether or not you think they'll address that at a federal level with the conservancy issues with the USDA. And also to answer your question about what's classified in DOE, any of the nuclear facilities and anything that has to do with nuclear energy on the submarines all contain PFAS.
Thank you. Yes, so a number of the states are very active. So Maine is one of them, Minnesota is one of them, Wisconsin is one of them. They have programs to compensate dairy farmers, which may or may not continue depending on the level of federal money that flows through to them. They are active in the product ban arena. Wisconsin just issued a plan to exempt folks that apply biosolids to their fields. They would not be responsible under Wisconsin spill rules for remediating those issues as long as they gave access to Wisconsin regulators to do cleanup themselves. So yes, I think as long as the federal government continues the flow of money, especially in terms of the dairy farmers, the states will continue those programs. If the federal government turns off those grants, I don't know to what extent Maine, for example, has the capacity to continue that funding on their own.
Any more questions?
Hey, how you doing? This one's about the NASA, what you had said about NASA. I'm a contractor in the state of Florida in fire protection. We're working on a NASA site. They have a site where they know PFAS because they were using the site to train their firefighters using the foam, so they know it's present. And they today have federal employees working in that soil in simple PPE. Is there some kind of federal mandate that says, like, because that's a federal piece of property, not a private property or a state-owned property. Is there a federal mandate that would somehow say that that's crazy, or that what they're doing is they're contaminating themselves or something like that, or is there no risk at all?
So if they're working in a firefighting training area where there's known PFAS contamination, then they should be taking OSHA-directed precautions. In terms of, their actual exposure risk, it would depend on the levels of PFAS in the soil and groundwater that they're potentially being exposed to. But that would be something that would be OSHA directed, the level of protective gear that they need to be using.
Right, if there's not a federal mandate coming down from the feds saying that these government workers are is there an OSHA mandate coming down? And then what is that number? I'd just be interested to know.
Yeah, I do not know.
Okay.
No.
They're gonna die, but it ain't gonna be because of PFAS.
Okay.
We've got time for one last question.
Hi, my name is Matthew Von Hendy. I compile the weekly PFAS newsletters of what's new with PFAS and also the business of PFAS. And with the business of PFAS, I look at the SEC filings for most of the major public companies that mention PFAS in their reports to investors. Some of the companies are openly talking about no enforcement, federal enforcement of PFAS regulations in their reports. And essentially, they're only concerned about the state level, and they're much more concerned about what's coming out, potentially out of the EU. I just was wondering if you could make some comments about that. And kind of related to that, should note that most of the federal agencies, science agencies that deal with PFAS have effectively been gutted by the cutbacks. Obviously, the EPA Office of Research and Development is one of the primary agencies, but many of the other PFAS agencies doing PFAS work have effectively been sidelined. I was just wondering if you can make some general comments along those lines and what you're hearing from clients.
Sure, thank you. So in terms of the industry concerns about the state regulations, so what is most alarming to industry from what I'm hearing from my clients are the product bans. So they're going into effect for various products, and they're going into effect at different times. And there's not, in addition to the bans, there are also reporting obligations. So a number of states have said, if you have PFAS in your product, you need to tell us by January 1 of 2027, and if you don't tell us, then you cannot sell that product in the state. So it's the hodgepodge effect, I think, that's most alarming to people, trying to figure out they can no longer sell their cookware in Minnesota. That's completely, Teflon cookware is not, you're not allowed to sell it in Minnesota anymore. And so just trying to navigate the web of state laws and regulations and the definitions, because a lot of times in the state laws that are passed, the definition of PFAS is overly broad. There's no real definition of cookware. Does it mean just what you would buy and take home? Does it implicate restaurant cookware? So there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of angst about these bans and product registration systems. In terms of the agencies, the federal agencies, yes, there's been a significant reduction in workforce and people who have institutional knowledge of PFAS and the research, and we just don't know yet what the actual implications are going to be, but it seems clear that the level of research probably will not continue at the pace that it has been in the past decade.
Jennifer, thank you.